Hey guys, before this episode kicks off, I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, I wanted to say that this is a sensitive topic about which many people become understandably agitated, and so please watch this in good faith. And on that point, I want to say explicitly that while Ciaran and I may at sometimes point out certain aspects of certain cultures that are maladaptive, neither of us believe that there is any congenital flaw or predisposition in these people. And when I say these people, I'm talking about whichever group of people you would like to focus upon as behaving badly. We are not talking about anything innate to their very being. This is to do with economics, incentives, environment, cultural expectations, education, many things. It's multivariate, it's very complex, but it cannot be said with any confidence that there are certain people in certain populations that are always predisposed to be a certain type of way. And so I wanted to say that up front. I wanted to also direct your attention to some other resources through which you can get a bit more exposure to perhaps what is a alternative point of view on the protests, on the problem in the jurisprudence of the United States, the aspects of the police that need to be reformed. And so I'm going to link those in the show notes below. They include some useful conversations between John McWhorter and Glenn Loury, two of my favourite thinkers, a video of Coleman Hughes, another of my favourite thinkers, some things we mention, some of the statistics that we talk about, and maybe a Harari article to do with what we cap off with. So there are going to be a few things there. Ciaran would want me to point out explicitly the Bret, Weinstein and Heather Hine conversations, so that will be there, and I'll link to those. And with that, I will let you get on with watching the conversation between Ciaran O'Regan and myself, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Axiom of the Infinite Unknown. Today we're going to be talking about the most pressing of topics, it seems, and what I'm going to open with before I hand it over to James to kick off our discussion points is a paragraph from an essay I wrote in 2018. So I published it on November 28, 2018. The article is called Brain Gardeners, Social Justice, Irony in the Irish Independent Newspaper. I won't get into what the article was about, but the opening paragraph that I had to that article, I think, is of relevance to this very discussion. Kind of, I suppose, laying out, what our attitudes are, maybe, is a way of putting it. So the paragraph goes like this, quote, "Fascist wolf. The problem with a guy like me writing a piece like this is that to the neutral, non-affiliated, I may seem like some kind of misogynist, racist, xenophobe, transphobe, homophobe, or all of the above. From a mile-high view, it makes sense that the guy criticizing the seemingly virtuous and compassionate is the villain, right? Then, to the ideologues already gripped by the talons of political correctness, the fact that I am a straight, white, cis male might mean that my so-called privilege discredits my opinion. To these people, my genetically inherited membership into the oppressive patriarchy means I have nothing of worth to contribute to the discussion, as my group identity apparently decides my views. Maybe reading this will help change your mind about whether a supposed member of the alleged patriarchy can have opinions of any worth. Or maybe it won't, and you'll think me some kind of fascist wolf in disguise, trying to lure you to the dark side of the woods. With that, I'll hand it over to James.
Thanks, man. I suppose I want to start by saying that race is a concept that began seeming ludicrous as long as a year ago, when I started looking at it more scientifically, and I noticed it had nothing much to say about anything we cared about, and far better with the concept of populations or even ethnicities, these things that had some relation to genetics, and therefore it had some relevance to what we care about, health, phenotypical traits, these sorts of things. And race only really was capable of loosely mapping onto the melanin content in somebody's skin, and that's useful for almost nothing, basically. If you care about vitamin D deficiency, it's important, I suppose, but for the most part, that's not much of a consideration. And so race in recent times, actually, it's one of those situations in which it happens slowly and then all at once, where, I don't know, a few months ago, an event happened, one of the many race-based events, and I remember it just looking as though everybody was playing a game that had completely stopped making sense to me. It's like people are dividing themselves into skins versus blouses. Like, your skins, I'm shirts, and what that means now is I'm affiliated with everybody who's on my arbitrary selected team, and it's as important as anything we could say about a human being. And it just looked absurd. It looked so absurd. And since then, I can't make sense of it. And unfortunately, when talking about this stuff, you have to use the labels that I've now come to detest, which are black and white. And so I'll be using them, but know that they make no sense to me as labels. And I think the whole thing is just ridiculous, because race has fixed no issues it hasn't caused. The only things it's ever helped are those things it harmed in the first place. Race was conceived of to justify slavery, and it's been perpetuated mindlessly for no reason, despite the fact that I really don't know that there could be a good argument for keeping it around. And I think the people who focus more on race are prima facie wrong in any argument. The more emphasis you put on race, I think you're veering towards just outright losing. And I want to say that up front, because I'm going to have to use these labels, but they just make no sense to me anymore. I have this skin color. My mum has a different skin color. My dad has a different skin color. My three brothers have a different skin color. Ciaran, you have a different skin color to me, but apparently we're all the same. We're white, and that means something about our lives. And I detest the idea that somebody could call me white and think it says anything about me. And we're seeing that from the people who are supposedly fighting for social justice. And before this was the argument made by the Richard Spencers of antiquity. And now it's just being reified to the utmost. and it's the excuse for more murders in riots and accidental deaths and more unrest and suffering. I just wanted to say that up front, and we can sort of dive in. Where do you want to dive in? Do you want to dive in on the? Do you want to talk about the sort of the actual movement? This I suppose we'd be best talking about the catalyst for this, the thing that it was ticking along and slowly getting worse and worse, but it really just it went exponential with the most recent murder of a man, and I'm gonna have to say it, of a black man in America, and what that's kicked off. So do you have anything to say about how you felt about the murder of George Floyd?
Just that, and it was obviously a very unpleasant thing to use a very to use a, it's obviously bad. It was such a visual spectacle as well. It was just, and the nonchalance on the police officer and everything, it was obviously not cool. And there's no way of defending that. Like, in a situation like that, given my, I suppose, the background that I have in a bit of martial arts and grappling, when I see something, in a situation like that, either the cop knew exactly what he was doing or didn't. Like, either you're trying to kill someone or you don't know how grappling works. You don't understand how chokeholds work. You don't understand how to fight. It's one or the other, and there's no way of me knowing for sure what the story was and whatever, but a major thing. So just regardless of what this, so let's say you if I could use another analogy, there's Tinder building for years, and this is a spark, and a kind of a point that I think is very prevalent or relevant, is that our evolutionarily selected for sense-making apparatus as it relates to our cognitive biases and our intuitions are not set up to deal with 7 billion people worth of news. And especially when we're able to see videos, and it's totally normal to have a visceral, a guttural, physical reaction to seeing something like that. That's totally normal because it's horrific, Regardless of any of the other surrounding contexts, a situation like that is horrific, and it's normal to see something like that, another human being dying and helpless and dying, and that's totally acceptable and normal. But then it's okay, but what next? And why did that situation occur? Precisely why did it occur? What's going on there precisely? And then not, okay, now all of a sudden using this as a way of justifying an already existing belief system. But instead of going precisely what went on in this specific scenario between two individuals. What led to this man in the whole set of circumstances upstream that led to this man interacting with this police officer and this police officer behaving like that. From both sides, what went on there that led to this interaction? Precisely.
Yeah.
Not just using an overly simplistic narrative of it has to only be racism and nothing else, and it's only racism, and that's the only thing that could be at play is racism. And any other point that could be brought up is seen as.
I want to touch on that actually, because that's sort of there's something I've been. There's 2 points there that I want to elaborate on. The latter is what led to that, and I can imagine what led to that was I also want to say it was abominable. I hope I would have liked for that to have gone without saying, but perhaps given what we're maybe going to talk about, people are less inclined to give us the benefit of the doubt. And so, I think it was absolutely horrendous, just horrific. But what would lead a man to do that? First of all, this is a man who hopefully isn't representative of many men. And I say that knowing that there's a shadow within all of us, but hopefully our shadow does not, it is not prone to overtaking us to such a degree that we're capable of doing that. But this is a man clearly undertrained, perhaps somewhat sadistic, but also having had a career in which he probably had a lot of people. And when I say a lot, I mean to say that I would reckon, and this is a reckoning, 95% of people he ever arrested would say, "Oh, the cuffs are too tight. Oh God, ow, this hurts. Stop it." I imagine that's a frequent occurrence in being a police officer, people complaining about the way you're treating them. And so there's probably that running through his head as he's killing somebody. He's probably not taking it because this is built on my assumption that I don't think he thought he was killing it. I don't think you look dead at a camera and at the crowd around you and think anything other than you might be the asshole on Twitter. I don't think you'll be the murderer on Twitter.
Yeah.
I don't think you stay there thinking this guy's going to die and everyone's going to see it. I think you stay there and think people might hate me for the fact that I do this, but I do this every day and, he's moaning, but he's going to be fine. I don't know that. I think he was trying to kill him, but that's not to justify it. Of course, he should be fired and he should be punished, criminally punished. Problem is, though, if you overcharge him with murder and you can't prove he murdered him, and I don't think he did purposefully murder him, it's manslaughter, but probably not murder, as far as I know.
That's why I mentioned it's either he wanted to kill him or he didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
They're the only two things I can see because
But do you think anybody would want to kill somebody and stare at the camera as they do it? I find that hard to believe. I really do. I think it's probably going to be more likely that this was a case of manslaughter, and by overcharging him with murder, he may well be found innocent of that crime. I think people will be very upset to probably find out that he's not going to get the time people want to see him get. Because I don't think a jury can say he murdered him. I don't think you can cleanly say without a reasonable doubt that this was definitely a murder. I think, and the second thing I wanted to talk to was this sense making you're talking about. And I see you mentioned the news, this overwhelming amount of news generated by 7 billion people. And I think, so this is the availability heuristic by Daniel Coleman. And I actually see this largely as a combination of prevalence-induced concept creep and the availability heuristic coming together to form what is a very strong intuition, misguided intuition, that what we're seeing is in any way representative of reality. Prevalence, and just to elaborate on prevalence-induced concept creep, that is this concept that was a psychologist called David something. I'll link the study in the show notes. And he proved that basically, the studies seem to have shown that basically people are, if shown something repeatedly, just desensitized to it to such a degree that effectively it was a color study. So they show them blue and they show them blue slowly, and you say this is blue, this is red, this is blue, this is red, and you had to identify it. And they'd eventually shift the blue such that it became purple, and it was still just blue to people because it happened slowly enough where people hadn't caught up. So this is the concept creep. This is of it, where basically your label creeps to encompass something broader than it started out narrowly defining. I think that's what's happened to racism. Now it defines something a lot larger than it once defined. Attitudes that wouldn't have ever been considered racist before. The prevalence part is basically if you see something enough, it becomes the normal. So if you're an airport security person and you're patting people down and you keep finding that people are, you're wearing your belt again, and you've got your watch on, and why are you carrying your water? But if that happens on a daily basis, you might not realize that 1 year ago, people, when it was first introduced with the Patriots Act, people they had metal on them far more often. And it might be the case that now people have metal on them 10% of the time they used to. But for you being a security officer, you still feel like I'm always finding things. And because that not only has the concept creep happened, when now we have more detectors and things, but also just the prevalence of it makes it such that you feel you've made no progress. And so we're blinded to the progress we're making. And I see those two both coming into play.
Related to that is something, I think, a concept of negativity bias as a major cognitive bias that's at play here, which is where essentially things that are negative experiences and memories stand out to us more. That would have been more evolutionarily useful for negative experiences to get more deeply embedded, let's say, in our understanding of the world and to alter the lens through which we view reality. So if I use an example, so I bounced for years in nightclubs when I was in college, especially. And an example there is, let's say it's a nightclub of 1,000 people and there's 500 guys and 500 girls, right? And let's say 5 of the guys in that nightclub are which is 1%, are extreme creeps. And they go around and they act very unpleasantly with loads of women in the nightclub. And the same women might have interactions with multiple of these guys who are very aggressive or creepy, let's say. There's potential that those women will go home having potentially like, oh man, men are creeps. Because they might have had 5 guys that were just outrageously inappropriate with them on the dance floor or wherever. But that was 1% of the people that were in the nightclub, of the males that were in the nightclub. But our intuitions aren't set up to analyze, take in all the stats. Okay, there's 1,000 people in here and 5 people gave me trouble. Our intuitions aren't set up for that. And because that wouldn't have served as much of a use. So that's an important factor at play. Another factor at play is related to the availability heuristic. It's got to do with our intuitions. And I got this one from Coleman Hughes, where he essentially, but if I could take this example from Coleman Hughes and adapt it slightly. So if I use something nothing got to do with race and just say, let's say you have a 1 in a billion chance every day of getting killed by a duck. A duck is going to fall out of the sky and kill you. 1 in a billion chance. There's 350 million people in America. That means every 3 days, you're going to have someone killed by a duck. And that's a reality. So like, according to the stats, right? So let's say if enough of these...
Brilliant example, by the way, mate.
Yeah. So like, and let's say there's 1/8 of the population in the US like to wear red jumpers. That means that every 8 times someone is killed by a duck, it's a person in a red jumper. And that means, and what happens if sometimes there's cameras at play that happen to capture the person in the red jumper being killed by a duck every 24 days or 21 days. And there happens to be cameras at play. So this situation, but there's 1 in a billion chance of it happening. Yet it will end up on the media every 2 to 3 weeks. A person in a red jumper being killed by a duck every 2 to 3 weeks.
I love this. It's brilliant. You know what? This ties into. Perhaps we can talk now about the Black Lives Matter movement,
Yeah.
because I see it as a peaceful movement with a noble aim of police reform, entirely predicated on a lie. And so it's difficult, isn't it? It's to know how to approach talking about it, because it is entirely, as far as the data can show us, predicated on something that is not true, which is to say this disparity, this inexplicable disparity, and it's the inexplicability part which is the lie, between, well, they believe they have an explanation, racism, but between the amount that white people are killed by police officers and the amount that black people are killed by police officers. And I suppose the problem is the data just shows it to be a narrative that's not, it's not even, you know the saying, the map is not the territory. It's like a child drew the map with a crayon and he missed out like half the city, and the church was massive and the town centre was a dot, because the map is not only not representative of the territory, it's just useless to knowing the territory. The territory is that, given the absolute number of whites versus the absolute number of blacks in America, whites are killed a lot more often by police officers, as you'd expect, in absolute terms. In proportionate terms, so per 100,000 black people, per 100,000 white people, it looks as though, well, actually, black people are far more likely, like almost, in some cases, 2 to 3 times more likely to be killed by a police officer. Until you control for age, which is important, because the older you are, the less likely you are to be killed. And black people are far younger on average in America. And you control for encounters with the police. And when you control for those two things, actually, counterintuitively, there is basically no difference. And any difference we have measured leans towards you being slightly safer being black in an encounter with a policeman, which is crazy if you've come to this purely based on what you were seeing on Instagram and Twitter. You wouldn't believe those facts, but that is the data that we have, and I will link in the show notes the data that proves this to be true. And from our best accumulation of data. Perhaps the accumulation of data is just off. It seems unlikely given the unbiased sources of the data. So with this being the case, and with these disparities not actually showing up in a way that, can we actually just ruminate on how incredible it is, though, that there is no difference? Like, how crazy is that? Because there are some racist people. Like, there are some. So how crazy is that literally you're in no more danger as long as you live your life as a sort of civilian who wishes not to encounter a policeman very often. Then even if you do encounter a policeman, you're in no more danger, really. It's just a matter of how many people are encountering the policeman on one of the teams that talks to the disparity. That's crazy, man. Because you'd think there was some difference, or just
because races do exist. There are actually
exactly
racists, and it's almost certain that there are legitimate racists that happen to be police officers. It's almost certain, like.
And you don't even have to be racist to maybe be a police officer who's been doing it for 30 years, who's come to the end of his career, and his whole life living in sort of Harlem. Every time there's a call, he's just like, okay, he turns up. And 95% of the time, it's a black man. You know what I mean? Like, Given that by the end of 30 years,
because of the area,
yeah, exactly. Given that at the end of 30 years doing your job, you end up going to the same scenes, and 95% is an exaggeration, but let's just say 70% of the time, your brain will just unconsciously wire to be sort of like expecting it a certain type of person to be on the end of the call. Do you know what I mean? So given that that's the case, you don't even have to be explicitly racist to maybe be making connections where you're just ready to act on something. I just think I think the fact that the data trend towards this, it blows me away, especially given what we're hearing at the moment.
Yeah.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's especially when you see that like that if the FBI data on actual crimes that are charged, you know, like what people are getting charged for, and you see that for the 2018 it was 12.6% of the American population were black, but 43.3% of weapons offenses and weapons possessions offenses were against black people, according to the 2018 FBI crime stats compiled from all the different law enforcement organizations.
Yeah.
So then but it still works out the same, even though, like you mentioned, there's these encounters, and not only are there these encounters, but there's encounters that are happening where there's a disproportionate likelihood of encountering someone with a weapon.
Violence, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not even looking at things like the murders, the homicide stats, you know, which I haven't seen. I haven't seen the homicide stats really, which are bananas as well. This brings me, this is the most important issue at play, I think. So like, if we just accept as a fundamental axiom, I think that what's important to acknowledge here are gray zones, and this is kind of, and this is, I don't mean for this to be a purposeful pun, but black and white thinking here is absurd. And that's not even like
the way I think of this is the OG false dichotomy.
Yeah.
This is the black and white fallacy in its starkest terms, because it's literally black and white.
Yeah. And that's the problem where like it's just shades of gray, and it's nuance and a complexity. So for example, it's simultaneously true that there are police officers that are almost certainly racist. But it's also simultaneously true that there are probably, I'd hazard a bet, almost certain, a majority that aren't in the whole of America. Because being a genuine racist seems like it's a legitimate, like tail end distribution of a population kind of a thing, you know, but it's also simultaneously, so like it's the case that, and also it's the case that there is, from what I've seen from American commentators, and for some that there's especially Coleman Hughes, who's been really insightful to look back on even older content prior to any of this, that there is police reform that needs to take place.
100%.
But it's also simultaneously the case that there are upstream issues that are leading to disproportionate encounters with the police from the black community. So these are simultaneous truths. There's reform needed in the way that the police are selected for, the screening process to select for individuals, the training process, and how it is that they're actually prepared to go out and enforce the law on a daily basis. And it's also the case that upstream, what is happening that's leading to disproportionate encounters with law enforcement.
They're not just simultaneous, they're orthogonal as well. They need to be handled separately, and they both need to be handled, but they needn't be conflated.
Yeah, they don't need to be and while there are undoubtedly cases, let's say with the police, they're almost certain that there have been like John McWhorter had that fantastic article that you had sent me from Time in 2017 about just police kill too many people, full stop, white and black, which is a fantastic article. And he lists off a load of situations where white people were killed, mirroring situations of black people. And the context here, another example of a simultaneous truth is that parallel, just like in the protest, the vast majority of people are almost certain coming from a place of goodwill and just trying to contribute, because it's self-evident that treating someone differently because of their skin color is a bad idea. That's self-evident. But it's also the case that there are people, just like there's a minority of almost certain actual malevolent actors in the police force that happen to be racist, there's also a minority of malevolent actors at play in the protests that are not there they're not there with noble aims.
This is the point, isn't it? Humans are humans.
Yeah.
Humans are and this speaks to something else with the police, because you would look at this George Floyd death and think that, all right, an earthquake moment happened, like something. This was a murder that happened that day, when probably in America alone, I don't know how many, you could approximate dozens of other murders happened that same day. And maybe not quite as many as that. Well, no, actually, probably as many as that. Dozens of murders happening that same day. This is a murder that happened. It's an important one because it happened between a power that was supposed to trust the police and a man who's supposed to sort of be protected by this force. But it's not one that should shake the world, but it has done. And what I don't understand is why last year Tony Timpa, a man with white skin, he was thrown to the ground. They put their knee on him, and the police officers, 3 police officers, joked about it as his breathing slowed. They started joking. Oh look, he's playing dead. And they started, time for school, wake up. I don't want to go to school, Mum. One of them jokes. 5 more minutes, Mum. And eventually he goes limp. And then they start saying, is he knocked out? And they're laughing. And this is a kid who was crying as they killed him. Crying. And the video's online, search it up, Tony Timpa. You won't believe these videos exist, but they exist in the exact proportion to the amount that happens. Nobody cares. And it's awful. And it makes me want to cry when I read about the transcript. Because I can't watch these snuff videos. I can't watch them. These are snuff videos. People are being killed in videos and people are watching it. I can't believe we're at a point now where people are just like, oh, look, another video of somebody killed.
Yeah.
I'll watch it. This is something I never want to see, and I don't watch them. But I read the transcripts, and it breaks my heart. But you know what? Nobody, his family cared, his friends cared, maybe his community cared, but nobody in England gave 2 craps about Tony Timpa.
But I give you an example, like here in Cork, right, and a downstream effect of that, and what the media is picking up on in particular. Like we were chatting off mic beforehand about the New York Times and the name of their recent and their podcast. Essentially, well, the New York Times for years and what some of the stuff that they've been publishing with this big identity politics bias, but of late. But anyway, because of the narrative that's being generated, where it's just race, as if it's the only game in town. There was a stabbing. Luckily, the kid seems like he's all right now. But there was a stabbing only a few. I don't know what Carrigaline is a town, maybe just outside Cork City, by a group of black teenagers. And instead of, and this video went up online, and it ended up on the Snapchat, and these teenagers were arrested. And I don't know what's going on at the moment, but they were laughing and joking while stabbing him and slashing him while he was on the ground, and his girlfriend was, and this only happened on Saturday night, right? And because it's just been race, instead of this being, these young lads did something horrific to another young lad. Instead, it's these black lads did something horrific to this white young lad. Because all of this momentum being put behind these race games it's
People
fueling
don't want to play these games
the
because
vision.
because these games don't work out the way people are playing them at the moment.
No,
Because when people start looking at the stats and they go, wait a minute, more white people are being killed by black people than black people by white people. Black people are killing white people disproportionate in the killings. What's going on there? And once people start looking at that, and we're making that some sort of an important thing because apparently skin color says something, rather than maybe the culture of
yeah,
and it's not. Anyway, I'm gonna go on a race rant again. As you say, these games, you don't want to play these games because
no,
they don't work out the way you think they do. They're dangerous,
no.
playing with fire.
And that's the thing is, man, it's like, and when does it end? Like, if you start identifying someone in this way as a primary means of identification and classification as to what that person is and what they're about and what their opinions are and all that, where does that end? Like Coleman Hughes has a brilliant, again, he is a really good 8 minute long video that he has on. It's a segment from an interview he did talking about implicit bias, implicit association tests, essentially. And in that, he uses an example of, he addresses this is from 2018, I think. He addresses the race situation as if it's, let's say, you can't treat it like something like a disease, like smallpox. So he used this example of, because of, like you mentioned, the shadow in human nature, he kind of puts it as, we won't ever, his viewpoint is that we won't ever get rid of racism. It will always exist. Just the same way that we won't ever get rid of murder. It will always exist. It's just going to be there. And he said, like, the cost to benefit analysis of trying to get rid of all murder in a city, let's say there's 10 million people in New York and a few hundred people get murdered every year or whatever. The cost of trying to get rid of all murder would end up with diminishing returns, because it would necessitate putting cameras in everyone's house, monitoring everyone with absurd infrastructure and all this. It's just not possible to do. It would actually lead to more of a negative outcome by trying to completely eradicate and bring the murder rate down to zero. It's totally unfeasible. And he says that when it comes to something like smallpox, it genuinely is of use to find the very last person with smallpox and treat them and separate them from everyone else, because that is something that it is of worth to get to zero. So we can't, they're not the same thing and they can't be conflated. And he relates that to this bias because of frequency of exposure, like the 1 in a billion example. I think he used lightning as an example. That if every 3 days we see someone on social media getting struck by lightning in the US, independent of the rest of the world, just the US, if you have 1 in a billion chance of getting struck by lightning, every 3 days someone in the US gets struck by lightning, because it's 330 or 350 billion people. If that means that it looks like, if the media put the video up online because it happened to get caught, then that means that every 3 days people are thinking, fucking hell, this is like an epidemic of lightning strikes. That's the way he put it.
Yeah, no, it's availability heuristic.
Because availability heuristic down to a T. So these are like meta principles that are so important to grasp, that our intuitions can lie to us. Our intuitions about the way the world actually is can lie to us, because they're not set up to deal with such vast amounts of information.
Exactly.
And that's,
No, dude, exactly, because this is, the evidence says exactly the opposite to what people think is true. So, if only every time somebody had to watch one, or rather chose to watch one of these murders, they had to watch another murder of somebody of a different phenotype, and then maybe they'd stop making this conflation of this happens to this type of people, because Daniel Shaver begged for his life as he was murdered by a police officer. Dylan Noble, traffic stop, killed by a police officer. Michael Parker, a moving violation, killed by a police officer. Sometimes it's in the back. Sometimes it's when they're already on the floor. Sometimes it's as they've got their hands up. But because their skin color, Ciaran, because these people I just named were white, they don't fit the narrative. They don't fit this idea that this is an epidemic for a certain type of people. Why are we not just going, look how many people are being killed by police officers? Why do they have so much force? Why do they have the ability to do this with such little regard to the consequence? What is this qualified immunity we're now finally hearing about? But I've been hearing about it for like 5 years from the libertarians I follow. Qualified immunity has been a libertarian platform on which they've been arguing for less police power for so long. And now everybody's like, wait, why have the police got qualified immunity? Ooh. But they're only ever coming to it because they care about black people. Care about all people. And find out why the police are able to have each other's back and why there's this sort of community there, this brotherhood of, don't worry, we won't tell, we'll change the story, we'll make it look like it was a fair killing, blah, blah, blah. As you say, police reform needs to happen, but it shouldn't be focused on a certain type of person. It's like if everyone got together and they wanted it only for men because more men are being killed by police officers. Screw women. Who gives a crap about women? We want it for men. Just fix the issue and then men disproportionately benefit from it, but everyone benefits from it in the aggregate. I think I want to close up with something you were talking about earlier, prior to the recording, which is this Independence Day sort of metaphor, this thinking tool, intuition pump. I think it's really good. So if we want to close up with that and maybe think about how we want to see us move beyond this. And when I say us, I mean the human race, the only race I could give two craps about. So how do we want to see us move beyond this?
So I put up a little video actually last night about this, and I was just out for a walk and I just ended up having a bit of a rant into my phone for 5 minutes. But essentially, as a bit of a hypothetical scenario, if you just think about if a Independence Day spaceship, like from the first Independence Day movie, just showed up over any country in the world, doesn't matter, and starts being a threat and start having alien fighter ships and all this stuff drop out of it. Immediately, all of us on Earth, we stop being black, white, Arab, Chinese, all that goes out the window. We stop worrying about which interpretation of the Bible, Protestant interpretations, Catholic interpretations, all that irrelevant. Shiite, Sunni, irrelevant. All that. And instead, we're all team people. Team people, we have fucking problems to solve. Get Will Smith, scramble the jets. We have shit to do, you know? And the thing about it is, in reality, is that we only even get to have discussions that are about these parochial issues, like skin pigmentation, nationalistic superiority, religious interpretations of scriptural texts. We only even get to have these absurd, small world parochial arguments because we have not yet been made extinct. If we're extinct, we don't get to have discussions about anything because there aren't any of us around and there isn't a civilization around to support discourse or publishing books. So the thing about it is, in reality, there are actually real metaphorical Independence Day spaceships floating around over our heads, and we're just not paying attention to them. Just like with this virus situation, there was.
Oh yeah, do you remember that? We're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah,
that little thing.
That little nugget.
Everyone just forgot about.
Everyone's forgotten about this. Yeah, the global pandemic. Just I forgot about it. It's just like it's almost like the virus. The virus will accommodate our rage. And, so like, in fact, so like, just like this virus situation, I didn't know about, so I'm not an epidemiologist or a virologist, but you'd hope that actual medical professionals were paying attention, but they weren't enough. And politicians, there was experts screaming from rooftops for years, warning about the realities of a respiratory transmission virus and pandemic risks. There was that famous TED talk from 2015 with Bill Gates. There was all sorts of other papers that have been referenced and of late highlighting major issues that, okay, we're really fragile to this particular thing. And lo and behold, the world economy has crashed as a result. And luckily it wasn't that lethal virus just yet, thankfully.
People don't realize how lucky
Yeah.
we got, how bad this could have been
Yeah.
if the virus was a bit more transmissible, if it was a bit more deadly,
Yeah.
it affected children, like any of this.
Yeah.
We got 0.5% mortality rate.
Yeah.
It could have been 60.
Some of these bird flus are 50, 60, 70% potentially. So like, but with these, but just like with in parallel, so there was these virologists, epidemiologists shouting from rooftops for years about this. In parallel are experts just as highly educated and just as using the same type of logic, reason, rationality, scientific methodology that are shouting from rooftops about things like biodiversity loss, climate change, nuclear warfare, and then more obscure topics, and also technological disruption, which the big three that Yuval Harari talks about.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth mentioning Harari.
Yeah, Harari, technological disruption, climate change, and nuclear warfare, three issues that Harari's written about extensively. On top of that, then are more obscure topics that are less discussed because the uncertainty around them is a bit greater, but they're also potentially catastrophic.
Solar flares.
Yeah, solar flares, near Earth objects like comets and asteroids in particular, and super volcanic eruptions. Like, these are real things, but they're not being discussed. So like, my dream, essentially, my hope is that, just like at the end of the Dr. Manhattan movie, like, my ideal scenario is that, just like at the end of the Watchmen movie, Dr. Manhattan is this unifying nemesis that knits people together, because people are more afraid of Dr. Manhattan than they are of each other. And that's the reality of this situation, is that we should be far more afraid of nuclear warfare, climate change, technological disruption, and then these other seemingly obscure topics than we are of each other. Like, we should be more afraid of them, but not enough people are aware of them. So I think that Independence Day analogy is a useful one to use.
I like it, man. I'm glad you explained it. And
we don't have time for this shit. Like, we don't have time for all this conflict based on race, religion, skin pigmentation.
And that's not to say we don't fix the police.
Yeah.
But what we don't do is we don't throw a bedsheet over it and then try to feel for the solution. Because what we're doing when we make it about race is we're actually obfuscating, obscuring any relevant information. We're focusing on weird parts of it, and we're not getting to the root of the issues, as you said, the upstream causes. I think,
and in this situation, I suppose the reason I like the extinction thing, and I think it's the only useful meta narrative that genuinely unites us all. Like, the only meta narrative that I think is like cross-cultural is that we'd rather not be extinct. Like, I think it doesn't matter what religion you are, what your pigmentation is, we'd rather we weren't extinct, right? And
we're united in that.
We're united in our lack of desire for extinction. But the thing about it is like, if that becomes a fundamental axiom at the basis of how it is we interpret the world and social circumstances and environmental interaction and how we interact with the planet itself, then that forces us to address issues of economic disparity, because let's say we just take economics independent of race, because it forces us to go, well, what's going on that we have equality of opportunity for people to be able to contribute to the problem solving scenarios in which we find ourselves. So how do we end up with, so then all of a sudden, what way do we need to end up to have 7 billion people able to contribute to solving problems in science, engineering, design, and art? Just to use those examples. I'm basing that off that Neri Oxman paper from 2016.
Krebs cycle.
The Krebs cycle of creativity, because they fit into each other in this iterative fashion that she described. And so like, that to me is the thing. It's like, how about we just focus on what is, okay, we'd rather we weren't extinct. How about we try and orientate in the world such that we have everyone aiming towards having everyone able to contribute. Like, because who knows how many Einsteins or Marie Curie's or Richard Feynman's are in slums in New Delhi, or are a Uyghur Muslim in a concentration camp in China, or are in the hood in the US somewhere. Doesn't matter of skin color.
Or even if they're like a mum who had to end her career early to have children because she wanted to have children, and now wants to get back into the workplace and has no means by doing so, because we're failing our mums who spent years raising children, but we place no economic value on their contribution. Even those people, we are missing out on so many minds that are out there to be exploited.
We're not utilizing the human potential that's at play. And if anything, right,
we'll wrap up
the
after
interest.
this.
If any, and this is where as I finish with this, is that like, it's in the interest of even the most, let's say that if you just take someone who's really selfish, who's a narcissist, or let's say even if they don't even care about their own family, only they want to be able to get theirs in life. It's in their interest as a single individual who only cares about themselves not to have slums in Delhi, or to have people that are like essentially living in utter deprivation in Africa, because it's in their interest to have those billions of people contributing to solving problems that will decrease their chances of getting wiped out by a nuclear holocaust or a space rock. So it's in everyone's interest for everyone else to be okay, and not only okay, but able to get educated, able to partake in the market, able to partake in society in a way that is from a position of equality of opportunity, orientated towards solving problems.
I think that's such an important point to end on, man. I'm really, as ever when talking to you, I feel like I could have multiple 5-hour conversations about 100 different things we've only touched on. Do you know what I mean? And so there's so much there. But I think for now we'll end this, and maybe we'll finally do something about this, the existential crises that we both identify as really worth considering. Maybe next time.
Excellent.
So thanks for the conversation, man.
No, it's my pleasure, man.